Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us, as the usual question is?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Reid, my name's Tim Maloney, and I ask questions on behalf of a number of court participants, essentially postmasters, all of whom have been prosecuted to conviction by Post Office and subsequently have had their convictions quashed.
I understand.
Quite close to the beginning of your evidence, Mr. Beer asked you about the appreciation at senior levels in Post Office of the seriousness of the implications of the Common Issues Judgment and the Horizon Issues Judgment, and what that was not long after you took up your post.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. And you agreed to his term that the leadership team was living in a dream world, some of them, and didn't seem to appreciate the implications of the judgments.
Yes, I qualified that by saying that some were in denial and some were in paralysis of the judgment that was made, and limited contingency had been put in place for the prospect of losing the litigation. Yeah.
But the primary focus was on looking to the future without there being a real emphasis on rigorously examining what had gone on in the past at that stage.
I think that's a fair conclusion.
Yeah. And so, for example, you weren't directed towards the examination of the propriety of previous convictions.
No, I wasn't, no.
But you went on to say that the negotiation and settlement process around the Common Issues Judgment and the Horizon Issues Judgment gave you an opportunity to more fully understand the implications of the judgments.
Yes, unquestionably, that was my genuine introduction to the victims, first and foremost, and also, therefore, the understanding of the behaviours rather than necessarily the system, if that makes sense. I think that was my introduction to behaviours of the past.
Can I just focus on your introduction to the victims?
Yes.
For these purposes. You were able to listen to postmasters and hear the accounts of what had happened to them.
That's precisely how that process worked, yes.
Yeah. And just as one example of that, did you take part in a mediation meeting in respect to the GLO at which postmasters were present?
Yes, the 4 or 5 days of mediation stroke settlement, that process, I did speak and listen quite extensively. I think there were 5 or 6 who brought their narrative to life for me, yes, which was very helpful.
And how that narrative was brought to life, Mr. Reid, was that you, was it with Jane Davis, went into a room with those 5 or 6 just to hear their stories?
Yes, no, it wasn't with Jane, but yes, that is correct. Yes.
Yeah. And one of them was Joe Hamilton.
That's correct.
Yeah. And another was a Scottish woman who'd been one of the lead claimants in the GLO, a lady by the name of Louise Darr. Do you remember her?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And she'd been cross-examined during the course of the GLO.
Yes.
And in that meeting, you told the postmasters that you would do everything to transform the future of Post Office.
Yes, that was my commitment.
Yeah. And importantly, Ms. Darr, and she broke down and she told you this, told you what had happened to her and said, and this may have been important to you in appreciating what was needed, that you needed to fix the wrongs that had been done in the past as well as looking to the future. Do you remember that?
I do, that's correct.
And was that an important meeting for you in terms of the understanding of, to use your term, the harm that postmasters had suffered?
Yes, it was. As I said a couple of minutes ago, it brought to life the behaviours of the Post Office as opposed to necessarily my understanding at that stage, which was it was purely system-led.
Yeah. Now, one of the people who had suffered harm a number of years prior to that meeting was a woman by the name of Jackie McDonald from Preston in Lancashire. Okay. Now, I'll have to just give a little bit of detail of Jackie McDonald's case in order to ask the question that I'd like to ask about her case, if I may, Mr. Reid.
Understood.
Yeah. So Jackie McDonald had encountered shortfalls in her post office. She reported them to management. She was ultimately suspended after an audit, that's some £90,000 or so shortfall, and her assistant Katie took over as the manager. The shortfalls continued. Katie had to stop work because she was suffering from anxiety and depression as a result of the continuing shortfalls. And ultimately, Mrs. McDonald was prosecuted. Are you aware of her being prosecuted as one of the people who was prosecuted?
I don't remember the specific case. When was this? What date was this?
It was in 2010, 2011. So
Okay.
some time before the GLO, some 8 years before the CIJ and the HIJ.
I understand.
Now, she was 47 years old and the mother of teenage children she went to prison. And she was sent to prison for 18 months after pleading guilty to theft. She went to Style Prison to start with, which is near Manchester, and then she was sent to Durham Prison. And she spent her 18-year-old daughter's birthday, her daughter's 18th birthday, in Durham Prison. And then she later went to a prison near York called Askham Grange. You may have seen, during the evidence of Mr. Bradshaw, because Mr. Bradshaw investigated Mrs. MacDonald, that he recorded in a self-appraisal form after her conviction how ensuring that a plea of guilty to false accounting was not accepted, but insisting on a plea of guilty to theft was essentially one of his key achievements of the year. Did you see that?
I don't recall it specifically, but yes.
He recorded on the form that he had persuaded the prosecution barrister to proceed with the allegation of theft and not accept a plea of false accounting. Okay. And Miss MacDonald has explained her experiences, described her experiences in a statement to this inquiry. She explained how traumatic the audit and investigation process was. And the auditors asked her, what have you done with the money? What tree have you squirreled it away in? And her house was searched, and in front of her, she was asked, the searchers were asked, is she cooperating? Is she answering questions? And one of the people about whose behaviour Miss MacDonald complained was a woman by the name of Caroline Richards. Caroline Richards was a business development manager who had called in the auditors and attended the audit, and she's the person that Miss MacDonald had been liaising with. And as long ago in 2013, in her application to the mediation scheme, Miss MacDonald said the following, Mr. Reid. The investigators for the post office were bullies and intimidated me the first time they came in with their lies about my individual case being unique and uncommon. They returned once again when I was forced to step down, and Katie was running the post office under someone else's name and intimidated her with wage deductions from monies missing and jail time. My husband eventually came downstairs after he heard the news of the threats Katie was receiving and told them both, Steve Bradshaw and Caroline Richards, to get out of the shop immediately and never come back. Katie had to leave early and had to take a leave of absence because of anxiety and depression, because of the bullying that she took from those post office investigators. So the post office investigators being Steve Bradshaw and Caroline Richards. And you told the inquiry, as you've, in fact, in answer to questions from Miss Watts, you've reiterated this just before lunch, Mr. Reid, that you've been very clear that at no stage we will walk past allegations of wrongdoing in the organisation. And you've made that very clear publicly to all colleagues and to postmasters themselves. And you said specifically on Wednesday, and it's at page 48 of the transcript, and you've repeated it this morning to be fair to you, Mr. Reid. With regard to the remediation unit, I'm very clear that we've conducted a piece of work which you've heard a lot about at this inquiry, which is referred to as the past roles piece of work. And once again, I'm confident that there are not individuals involved in postmaster-facing activity that had roles in the past where allegations of anything of wrongdoing has been brought to my attention. Is Caroline Richards still employed in the remediation unit, Mr. Reid?
This is quite a difficult question because, and I'm looking to Sir Wynne, I'm not sure I'm at liberty to discuss some of the specifics about these individuals. If you recall, a couple of days ago, we talked about external agencies supporting us, and there are a number of individuals that I think it would be inappropriate for me to mention and to give any insight into what is specifically happening. I know that doesn't sound particularly helpful, but
No, I understand, Mr. Reid, and I think it would be unfair on all individuals if I were to not understand.
Yes.
Plainly, there have to be parameters.
Correct.
Can I ask you some more general questions
Yes.
about that then?
Can I take it, Mr. Maloney, that you don't wish to pursue that specific question?
So I think the question's been answered by to be honest.
You and
So
I think
there are obviously we have to be responsible with questioning, sir.
I think I only asked you so that you didn't feel inhibited on behalf of your client in going any further if you thought that it was appropriate to go further. If you're content with where we've got to, that's fine by me.
If I'm being told by a witness that he has real reticence about going here, that there are particular reasons why they can't go there, then I think it's only responsible because I can deal with this generally. I've asked my question, I've received an answer, and I can deal with this generally now without causing undue difficulties which may not be necessary at all in order to make the points I need to make.
Fine. Thank you, Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Reid, would you, without descending to the specifics, would you accept that, and recognising your qualification as to postmaster-facing activity, but would you accept that, as a general principle, somebody about whom complaints had been made of a nature that were made against Miss Richards should not be involved in the remediation process?
I agree with that, and I would just bring a little colour, if I may.
Yeah.
The Project Phoenix work, which is ostensibly feedback and narratives that we received during phase one of the inquiry in terms of the human impact hearings, as well as what I have experienced through my restorative justice meetings, and I received direct feedback during those meetings on individuals. That was the genesis of the Project Phoenix work. 47 particular cases, I think, as I mentioned previously, not 47 individuals, but 47 cases, 6 individuals who were involved in those meetings. We have interviewed many of the individuals again through their legal representatives and sought to be able to discuss with those individuals the names and the issues that emerged during the human impact hearings and that emerged during the restorative justice meetings. Yeah. We've examined over 130,000 documents associated with those particular case studies. The number of individuals impacted is 6, of which, as I mentioned, I think on Wednesday, 3 are specific cases that we've just touched on now that I would say that have got external agencies are helping look at that.
Can you understand that for postmasters who are making a claim for compensation, the idea that one of the unit that is dealing with claims for compensation might be somebody who was involved in previous misbehaviour would be something that would concern them?
I think that would be very concerning for them, yes.
Because you have said, and it's perhaps likely that Mr. Ricaldin will say, that even as a first principle, perhaps Post Office should not have been responsible for administering the HSS.
I have said that, and I'm sure Mr. O'Callaghan will say the same.
And so to compound that with having a member of staff, I'm speaking in general terms now, against whom complaints have been made for misbehaviour during the investigation process, would be to add insult to injury in a sense, wouldn't it?
I understand that.
And you talked this morning of rebuilding trust. It would be integral to rebuilding trust to ensure that that didn't happen, wouldn't it?
It would be essential, yes.
Yeah. That's all I'd like to ask you about that. I'd now like to ask you about the Strategic Platform Modernisation, SPM, and NBIT. And this is the only other topic I'll ask you about,
I understand.
Mr. Reid. You understood from your early meetings during the mediation of GLO the harm that had been caused. And Horizon Software lies at the root of all of that harm, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Postmasters suffered enormous harm because of it.
That's correct.
And for many other reasons as well, but at the core of it is the Horizon Software and its unreliability.
That's correct.
Plainly, you'd accept that dealing efficiently, dealing with alacrity with the Horizon issue is something that Post Office should face, given the harm that it's caused to postmasters. Yes. I'd like to ask you, if I may, about the progress that's been made with that. And the first, just like to look at two documents, please. One is a readout of a meeting with Minister Hollingreich in April of 2023. And I'll take you to it. I'll ask it, but and then the second document is the board minutes from the 4th of June of this year.
Okay.
Okay. So if I could first go to the readout of the meeting with Mr. Hollingreich, and that's BEIS 40653. Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is, we can see the introductions, don't need to go there, but we can see the attendees. If we scroll up, please, thank you. We can see that you're there, Mr. Reid, as is Mr. McInnes from Post Office, and Lorna Grattan, and also Minister Hollingreich. Yeah. Can I just go to some of the detail of this? And if we could scroll up further now, please, so that we can get the main body of the... That's great. That's spot on. Thank you. We see at the start that you raised the fact that the Permanent Secretary had made the decision to withhold the funding and asked for Mr. Hollingreich's opinion. Mr. Hollingreich said that he, the Treasury and the Permanent Secretary are keen to see a plan from Post Office about its funding ask and know that the Horizon replacement is a concern. You said that the funding ask won't be ready, approved by the board until June. And the main issues are Horizon replacement, Paul underestimated the cost of this, and then the inquiry costs and the compensation costs. And then, but I'll go on to the rest of it. Did you, at this stage, not have a firm plan as to what to do with Horizon?
Yes, we did have a plan, but as we were overrunning, it was important that we come back to government who wanted to understand what they thought our revised plan for Horizon was in terms of the overall funding for Horizon.
Yeah. Then, if we go down further, we see that on the penultimate bullet point of this, which is on the second page, but we can see it here. Nick Reed said that another pressure was the inquiry, which is going to scrutinise the rollout of the Horizon replacement. Paul needs to ring-fence stroke compartmentalise this piece of work. What did you mean by the inquiry is going to scrutinise the rollout of the Horizon replacement?
I think exactly that. I'd obviously made a commitment in 2019 that we would get off Horizon, and there was a twofold reason for that. One, because Horizon was 30 years old. It was expensive to run, expensive to manage, and clearly had been associated with appalling issues of the past. And the second reason, so that was the first reason. The second reason was it was clearly a system that was tarnished as a consequence of the past, and I wanted to make sure we moved across. We got off it. My point to talk about ring fencing and compartmentalising was that we submitted our funding requests to the department, and the investment that was required for the next phase of the Horizon work needed to be very clearly understood by BEIS, and I wanted to make sure that when we made that submission, they understood the extent and the necessity to get off Horizon and what that looked like, and more importantly, that they understood specifically why it was late and why it was going to cost more.
Yeah. And you had really quite significant delays in relation to the replacement for Horizon?
We had at that stage, and I think what had happened by, I think we said it was May 23, this meeting, I seem to recall.
April 23.
April 23. Yeah. So by April 23, we had embarked on two very clear streams of work. One was around the design and build of the system, and the second piece of work, which was initiated in January of that year, was around the deployment, training, and rollout of the system. And there were two very distinct pieces of work. And so that was the point I was trying to draw to the attention of the department.
So by April 2023, was the design and build of the system pretty much set in stone? Or were the decisions still to be taken?
It's a difficult question to answer. I think we had not got to the stage of release 2. We hadn't, at that stage, developed the banking and total mails functionality of NBIT, and so there was still a long way to go. So it was quite early in terms of its evolution. We were still having conversations about, is this a replacement for Horizon, or is this a modern system development that is going to ensure that postmasters are in a very different, put in a very different place? And I think if I look back to 2019, it was very much we are replacing Horizon, as opposed to this is going to be a full-scale transformation of the underlying EPOS system, which is very much the attitude today. And I think that's one of the core distinctions between why, when we set out on this journey, the replacement was 180 million or thereabouts, and why that cost has obviously increased as a consequence of what we've learned through the inquiry. But more importantly, that we want a system that is more than just a replacement, but actually is a whole-scale transformation of the way we do business in the post office.
Can I just take you to the final paragraph on page 1 of this document that I brought up? It reads, Kevin Hollingake asked how Post Office is going to try to find a number that they are comfortable with for the cost of replacing Horizon. Nick Reed said that they are considering more of a modest approach rather than something transformative. For example, not rolling it out to all 11,500 branches and opting for the minimum viable product. Another issue is that we don't know what the future of Post Office will be, and designing a system that will work for Paul in decades to come is difficult. Is that reflective, Mr. Reed, of there being very firm decisions about what this was going to look like in April 2023?
I think the issue here is that the department had decided to withhold funding. They were concerned about the potential cost of the replacement system, and they wanted us to consider other options, and all options, in fact. And it was at this stage that we came back and had a broader conversation around, well, what are those options?
And so there isn't any certainty here, is there? And you were essentially considering something less than transformative.
Yes, I mean, that was one of the options that was on the table.
Yeah. So there was no certainty in April 2023 about what the replacement for Horizon was going to look like.
Well, we thought we were on a particular journey, and the government were concerned about the increasing cost, and they wanted to get assurance from that, which is obviously why we've had two external parties assure for the government on their behalf what exactly is being developed.
Can we go to the second document I'd like to look at, please, which is Post Office 00448-648. And before I ask you questions about this document, Mr. Reid, we heard evidence from Mr. Railton on Tuesday that you've already referred to.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were present when Mr. Railton gave his evidence.
I was indeed.
Yeah. And Mr. Railton has been interim chair since the 24th of May, 2024.
That's correct.
And these are board minutes from the 4th of June of 2024, so just over a week after Mr. Railton became interim chair. You're present, obviously, as NR, and Mr. Railton is NR with a lowercase a.
That's correct.
Now, page 5 of 21, I'd like to look at, please, because this deals with the strategic platform modernisation. Mr. Blake took Mr. Railton to a different section of this document, the minutes where Mr. Railton was asked about how he was the first to suggest in a break clause in the continuing contract with Fujitsu. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yes.
And that can be seen at page 11 of this document.
Okay.
But page 5 is the strategic platform modernisation. And we can see here that it should be under investment committee. So it should be down the page. Yeah, there it is. That's 3.5 investment committee. And key points advised the investment committee met on May 16th and focused on SPM, the strategic platform modernisation. There were uncertainties in respect of this project across a number of issues, including funding. So this is June 2024, Mr. Reid, only some 5 months ago. 4 months ago, in fact. 2 external reviews had been completed in respect of the project, and both concluded red ratings. The build/buy points had been considered, although the build approach without the necessary in-house expertise seemed flawed. Mr. Railton shared his view that the conversation on buy/build was the wrong question and thought that the question was build/build, and then the question was whether to build internally or externally. There needed to be a number of conditions met for a successful internal build, however, such as stable business, good governance, and quick decision-making. With the company not fulfilling these conditions, the view of Mr. Railton was that a third party should be commissioned to build. Mr. Railton advised that he saw 3 options. Firstly, SPM could carry on as was. Secondly, a third party could be engaged to build the new system. And thirdly, that Horizon could be brought in-house. All of these options needed to be carefully considered. The dashboard reporting to the investment committee showed 17 red platinum projects. A number of these were outside appetite, although there was a lack of clarity around the definition and terms were not used consistently throughout the business. It was noted that issues in respect of the Copperstock project, including management of the contractor and communications. there's still really quite a lot of uncertainty around SPM even in June 2024, isn't there?
Different uncertainty, but yes, there is uncertainty.
Yeah. And that's the new chair coming in essentially suggesting there needs to be root and branch consideration of this.
That is correct.
Yeah. And that's only 4 months ago.
4 months ago.
Yeah. Mr. Railton was asked by Mr. Blake when he gave evidence the following, and this is at page 164 of his evidence. We've seen in the YouGov report, for example, and in evidence that the inquiry has heard, of issues still being experienced by sub-postmasters in relation to their use of Horizon. And that's the importance of it, Mr. Reid, isn't
Yes.
it? It's still ongoing. Is it possible, is it likely, that sub-postmasters are going to be using that same system into 2030? And Mr. Railton replied, it is possible. I don't think it's likely, and certainly our intention and the intention of the new team is to move away from Horizon to a new system that can deliver. I'm sorry to go back to the strategic review, but a system that's fit for the future as soon as possible, but to do that in a way that doesn't disrupt postmasters' activities. So that was the answer as to whether or not, essentially in 2030, which is when the Fujitsu contract is due to run out, isn't it?
Well, we haven't got agreement to a 5-year commitment, yes, but that was the plan.
Yes. That's the possibility. Is there a firm decision in the strategic review as to how to do this? I'm not asking you what the decision is. Is there a firm plan now in respect of all of the replacement for Horizon in the strategic review?
I've not yet seen the specifics of this. As you're probably aware, for the last 6 weeks, I've stepped back to focus on the corporate statements associated with the inquiry, and that is something that I'm sure at the end of this particular session I will be back involved in that activity. So I can't give you that assurance at the moment, Mr. Maloney.
Has it taken too long to find a replacement for Horizon?
Yes, it has.
And do you bear any responsibility in how long it's taken, Mr. Reid?
Yes, I mean, if you go back to my last statement that I made, the very last pages on that statement, I have a number of regrets, I think, in my 5 years in the business. And one of those regrets is the inability to have the bandwidth to get involved in the SPM program and project as much as I would have liked, having been spread a bit too thinly. And that is a big regret of mine, and I wish that I'd had more time to do that. One of a number of regrets, but that was certainly one of them which I expressed in my statement.
That's all I asked, Mr. Reid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, unusually, I've just got a couple of questions to ask, which I've been asked to put to Mr. Reid, one by way of correction of something that I said, and then some supplementals that follow it.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Beer.
It'll be less than 5 minutes. Can we look, please, at poll 0044 8701? Thank you. You remember I showed you this letter. It's Mr. Vamos's letter, the Dear All letter.
Yes, indeed.
And I drew your attention to the third paragraph, the fourth line, in which it was said, in reality, it's highly likely the vast majority of people who've not yet appealed were in fact guilty as charged and were safely convicted. Yes?
You did, yes.
I suggested that this was put up on the Post Office's website.
Yes, you did.
But it was no longer on the website. In fact, it's been drawn to my attention that it is still on the Post Office's website. The website, which I'm looking at now, contains some text alongside it, i.e. the publication of Mr. Vamos's letter. It says, the Post Office has published on the 22nd of February 2024 correspondence from the 9th of January, that's your letter, to the Lord Chancellor, sent by the Post Office to the Ministry of Justice, copied to the Department for Business and Trade. The purpose of the correspondence was to explain the work that the Post Office had requested its legal counsel, Peters and Peters, undertake to proactively identify on the papers available any convictions that could be unsafe. This was primarily to offer the government any support that might assist them as they consider relevant issues in advance of passing legislation, without any value judgment on what the correct course of action might be. The letter references a note provided by Post Office's legal counsel. This note was not solicited by the Post Office, and as can be seen, was sent to express the personal views of its author. Post Office was in no way seeking to persuade government against mass exoneration. Post Office are fully supportive of any steps taken by government to speed up the exoneration of those with wrongful convictions and to provide redress to victims with the information having been provided to them to inform that consideration. So your letter of the 9th is published, Mr. Vamos's Dear All letter is published, and then there is this explanatory text alongside it, which says Post Office was in no way seeking to persuade government against mass exoneration. Can we look, please, at your letter of the 9th, poll 0044 8381. I drew your attention to the 4th paragraph of this, if we scroll down. A natural corollary, etc. Yes, we looked at that.
We did, yes.
This morning. What I didn't do was go over the page. If we go over the page, please. You wrote in the penultimate paragraph, in the meantime, I attach a note prepared by Peters and Peters, which covers this and other issues you may find helpful in your deliberations. And that's the Vamos Dear All letter. So whoever the Dear All was sent to, it had certainly got to you by this time, hadn't it?
It looks like it, yes.
The covering text on the Post Office website, when it speaks about the Peters and Peters note, essentially takes 2 points. It says, firstly, Mr. Vamos's note was not solicited.
Yes.
And secondly, it says it expresses the personal views of its author. Was that the Post Office distancing itself from the content of Mr. Vamos's letter?
I think it was just trying to explain the letter. That was my understanding.
You, in your letter, attached Mr. Vamos's Dear All letter, didn't you?
Indeed.
Were you allying yourself with the contents of it by doing so?
No, I've been very clear that we weren't making any value judgments. We felt obliged to alert the Ministry of Justice to exactly what work had been done and to aid them in their deliberations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beer, and thank you, Mr. Reid, for 4 witness statements, 2 of which are very long and detailed, and for giving evidence over 3 days before this inquiry. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you, sir.
Right, we'll adjourn now and resume on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock.
Thank you very much, sir.